I am excited to talk about this a little bit. I think teacher residencies are trying to lead the field in how preparation programs and the partnerships that go into them can really use data to drive not only continuous improvement, but to understand our impact. I think we've been really shy in teacher prep to sort of own possible outcomes, but I think you'll see here there's dozens and dozens of ways that a strong teacher prep program and a strong partnership with school district can improve outcomes for kids, and we're all about trying to make those connections. I've also learned over the years, we have to start by talking about what NCTR is, what we are, what we do, but also what are the core components of effective teacher residencies. We have a vision for what an effective residency looks like. There's a lot of innovation happening out there, so I want to just name that we make room for that, but it's important you guys understand the components as we look at them. I'm going to share a theory of action, and you'll see how I tie a lot of that to our outputs and outcomes. I'm going to give you just a couple slides on impact data, which I think gives us a little bit of credence in terms of why we want to keep talking about these core components. And then we're going to go way down to some of the lessons learned with our partners as to how they have successfully or unsuccessfully used data for their own continuous improvement or to measure impact. And I'm going to show you a tool we created. We call it the Teacher Prep Portal that helps give some analytic tools to our programs so that they can look at their own information a little bit more thoughtfully. So who are we? NCTR, we are a network of high-performing teacher residency programs. We're dedicated to preparing effective teachers that can transform education and really transform educations for kids. We fully embrace CCSSO's work on Day One Ready. We believe there's room for improvement. Teacher prep can take the lead here. And so we have a two-part mission. One is to launch and sustain these teacher residencies. The other is to take our best practices and apply those to the field writ large. We think about that as like the float the boat idea. So what are we learning about really excellent mentors and how you select or develop them? And why can't we take that learning and apply it to cooperating teachers and maybe change the dynamic of how we use cooperating teachers in more traditional programs? So we do four things. We build and launch teacher residencies. We don't own or operate them. We partner with districts, higher ed, states, nonprofit organizations to sort of launch those teacher residencies. More and more, that looks like institutions of higher ed who are transforming a traditional program to a clinically based program. And so components of the residency are there, but there may or may not be stipends. So there's an opportunity to transform teacher prep to be really clinically based without some of the more typical teacher residency components there. We also run really a professional learning community we call our network. It's now 40 plus programs. They are teacher residencies that are between 1 and 15 years old. And they are where we learn so much. We're innovations driven. We try to push new ideas back in. We run instructional rounds. We do a national symposium. It's really our learning laboratory, and we learn so much from our partner programs. Practice to policy, it's just about trying to create good conditions for teacher residencies and clinically based models to thrive. And then research and evaluation, we're trying to really build this group of work up to emphasize like what are the learnings we have, because residencies are still really young and they're still relatively small. There's only probably about 4,500 or 5,000 graduates now just from our network of programs. And so we still have a lot of learning to do if we expect to multiply that by 10 or 100. What is a teacher residency at NCTR? We think these 5 components have to be present. The first is a partnership, a really authentic partnership. CCSSO has done some nice work in codifying this, or even some tools created to think about how to form these. We think a school district or school districts, higher ed institution or multiple institutions, other community or education-oriented organizations all have to be together. And I should mention, many of our partners have teachers unions at the table. We have other business or philanthropy at the table. But at the core, we're talking about changing the dynamic between a K-12 school district and a higher ed teacher prep program. Why it's so essential for those to come together is because we think they've operated without a common impact goal for a long time. And so when you bring those guys together, you end up talking about what are the agreed upon outcomes that we believe will change the landscape for kids. Those impact goals affect everything else you decide on. So how do you decide who would make an effective resident? What are your outcomes? outcomes. If you're really trying to address a gap in middle school math and science, then who you choose to recruit should reflect that that's a focus for this partnership, and that you want to recruit not only the residents with that in mind, but the mentors. Who are these cooperating teachers or these teachers of record who both have the responsibility of teaching adults, but also teaching kids? Who are those folks, and how do we develop and support them so they're the most excellent teacher educator they can be for the resident? All of that comes together in the year-long clinical experience. This is, I think, where traditional teacher prep programs and higher ed-based programs have the most work to do, because we have to really think about the knowledge, the skill, the disposition, and the learning experience that a candidate needs to have in order to demonstrate a skill. It's not coursework and then practicum. They've got to come together in a much more integrated way. For our organization and our partners, we focus specifically on high-need schools. So graduate placement in Title I schools is really a priority. But I know for states and other institutions, not all of your school districts that hire candidates are going to be Title I. But the idea of really thinking about placement, so you have a plan for that candidate. What does the future look like for him? Where is that teacher going to go? Because that should be considered in their clinical training experience. And then in an effort to really connect the prep, pre-service, and in-service, residencies take a role in the aligned induction and assessments, using tools that are part of the expectations for the hiring school districts and incorporating those into the preparation experience. So when those are aligned, we blur this dividing wall between pre-service and in-service. And again, it goes back up to this partnership where you get K-12 and higher ed together, thinking collaboratively about what are the best outcomes for teacher prep programs. So big picture, what are we trying to do? We're really trying to build better relationships so that there's a consistent, reliable pipeline of effective teachers. I think that every principal and superintendent would like to say, oh, we have 7 consistent, reliable pipelines of outstanding teacher prep pathways, and we don't have gaps. We don't end up with terrible shortage areas. We don't end up with chronic turnover in certain buildings. And so we think there's some other interesting things that come with that, right? Like universities have the opportunity to innovate the coursework. Residencies end up supporting the whole life cycle of teachers. We think about residencies as new teacher training, but the less discussed option is that this is also really teacher leadership development. And we're looking at these teachers of record, both supporting them and in developing them, but also recognizing those that are really effective classroom teachers and using them in this teacher educator role. The districts and principals being able to vet for quality. We talk about this being a year-long interview. Principals say that to us. I knew early on that this was someone I was going to hire, or I had slated for a position I thought was coming open. And then also I think residencies have really gained some traction because they've been focused on recruiting and selecting candidates that may not otherwise typically select into teaching. And I think that the data shows us we've got a lot of room to go in both diversifying the teaching workforce, opening it up to non-traditional candidates, using different lens for selection of how you develop those competencies. Which ones do you need to select for, and which ones can you develop in a teacher prep program? So this is our theory of action. You can see that NCTR on the far left, we launch and sustain high-performing programs. Those programs prepare effective teachers. Those teachers, the residents and graduates, provide effective instruction. And then the students are able to grow in their learning, which ultimately, we believe, closes the achievement gap. This is a pretty far distance. NCTR is 4 steps removed from student achievement, and that does cause us some issues and complications. This data is now a year old. I think this year the class of residents is about 1,500. We've brought several other new partners in. But I like this because we're thinking about diversifying the teacher workforce. We're thinking about people who might come in through non-traditional pathways. We're thinking about the school as a lever of change and turning that into a learning laboratory. And then again, with these mentor teachers, we're thinking about them as teacher leaders or teacher educators, which is very intentional language we use, because typically a cooperating teacher is really thought of as a teacher educator, but in the redefined mentor role in a teacher residency, it's very much a teacher educator. We're up to about 4,500 graduates as of last year. 31% of them are in STEM. Over a quarter are working with English language learners. 15% are working with students with special needs. 86% are still teaching after 3 years. And then 92% of these guys are in Title I schools. So one thing that NCTR did in our founding was to create the first standards for what effective teacher residencies look like. Right now, there's 4 main competency areas, and they closely follow those components of the residency. So partnership and sustainability, recruitment and selection of residents, training sites, and mentors, the residency year curriculum, that's the integration of the practicum and the coursework and pedagogy, and then graduate impact, so placement and induction and ongoing support we use with graduates. So partnership and sustainability, we believe that these guys have to come together to prepare teachers in direct response to student and district needs. The underlying comment here is there has to be data that clearly captures and defines those needs. So these partners have to come together and be looking at data, come to some agreement about what the story is that data is telling you, and then move to action to set some impact goals. A shared vision of what an effective teacher knows and does is really at the heart of that. On the selection front, so if you've got these impact goals, right, that's going to change where you choose to train teachers, who the mentors should be, who are the residents, what are the skills they're going to come in with versus be developed. And we think that when you backward map that idea of selection from what that effective teacher knows and does, you end up finding folks that are more aligned with the district need, and you're more likely to kind of accomplish those goals. And I think the thing we don't often talk about is training sites and how important it is that if we're going to expect a new teacher to be successful in a high-need urban school, that he or she should probably have an exposure to a high-need urban school with the safety net of that effective mentor and the program or the teacher prep program providing that additional support and learning and teaching that goes along with that. I think the idea that a one-size-fits-all approach to teacher prep, we've got to challenge that now in that maybe it's possible we have to think about investing differently in different teachers, different subjects, different grades, or different schools, and creating a learning experience for those educators that will make them successful. I keep talking about the competencies of an effective teacher. That's obviously key to it. You have to develop teacher educators who know what those competencies look like, can model and demonstrate it, but can also coach those new teachers to develop those. So that's a complicated job that we require of our mentors. And that idea, the way we think that happens most successfully is in this idea of frequent cycles of practice, coaching, and practicing again. For NCTR and our partners, we come back to this idea that it needs to be a full year, because to really authentically and richly get those learning opportunities, there has to be a pretty well-defined scope and sequence. The last one here, I think, is about measuring our impact on schools and the communities, teacher professional growth, preparation and development, and student achievement. And then, of course, our support for existing teachers, those mentor teachers. If we can retain those effective mentors and give them professional growth opportunities, we're going head on onto our turnover challenge. I'm going to show you some of the ways we look at outputs and outcomes for each of these levers. The easiest one for me to think about is with NCTR, how do we know what we're doing is effective? Well, one is we have research-based standards, we revise them, we revisit them, we incorporate the best practices and the latest research from both within teacher prep, but outside of teacher prep and other fields. We have our new site development curriculum, we run this network professional learning community, we try to produce field advancing research, and ultimately our goal will be, have we changed how teacher prep looks? For our residency partners, how do they know that they're being effective? What are the outputs or outcomes they need to be looking at? One is their applicant pool. Are the applicants they're attracting or selecting aligned to those impact goals? The training sites, are they creating a nourishing learning environment? Graduation rate and attrition. We want them thinking about selection up front so you don't lose a whole bunch of people during the process. But on the other hand, we don't want teacher prep programs to certify any teachers that aren't ready and haven't demonstrated the competencies of the program. Placement rate, this idea of really aligning to district need. We would have high placement rates and really high hiring rates if that's operating well. Funding sustainability is one of the things I think is really valuable here, is that we are growing in our thinking about what are the immediate needs and costs that may exist for a teacher prep program to move to be a clinical residency, what are the long-term changes, and then what are just the realities that if we want to change who comes into teaching, how do we make it a more viable value proposition for them? And so I think that goes along with scalability and then stakeholder satisfaction. If school districts, higher ed, community partners, families, and students aren't satisfied with how the residency program is changing the landscape, then they're not doing their job. So stakeholder satisfaction is really critical for us. At schools, of course, we're thinking about student achievement and teacher performance. We're thinking about the partnership. How does the residency add value to your building? How do teachers collaborate within your building? Is the residency an asset in building those collaborative environment? Are we addressing staffing shortages, improving retention, and reducing churn? And for the residents, of course, we're looking at resident performance, mentors' perception of the resident's performance and readiness, the actual preparedness of the resident, and how well the program is supporting those folks. So mentors, we are looking at their effectiveness as teacher of record. We're looking at them as teacher educators and defining what a great mentor knows and does. We want to retain them as teacher of record, and we certainly want to retain them as mentors. And then their satisfaction and how well prepared they feel to be successful in their careers and their jobs. For our graduates, we want to make sure we're certifying these guys in high need subjects and grades. We're not trying to produce people who aren't going to have a really great placement experience. Retaining them, are they effective? Are we reducing their mobility or giving them mobility within other high needs communities? And what are the teacher leadership opportunities we offer them without having to have them leave the classroom? And then for students, we want students to be in classrooms where there's an effective teacher in front of them. And we think that the way we know that is not only with student growth, but if we're developing their ability to explore, question, think critically, grow, and persist. When you see all those bullets we had along our theory of action, we are not what we would call data poor. The interesting thing is the majority of our programs, the hardest data they have to get is the student achievement and teacher performance data. So we said, let's set aside that fact. Let's assume that's going to be hard to get. What can we look at that's within our control? And we've landed on a few things. One, our standards. Another, our stakeholder perceptions. Another, different pieces of the impact goal structure. And we decided at NCTR, as part of our seed grant, that we should build this teacher prep portal. And it's really a data analysis tool for our partners. So what you're looking at here is, it's actually a Tableau-driven tool. It zooms in on perception surveys that are given to residents, graduates, mentors, and principals. So you can sort of see along the top where this oval is. We've grouped them into these different focus areas. So right now we're looking at program design, and we're looking at our higher level research questions. So one of these is the residency program design meeting the needs of mentor teachers? The mentor feedback is pretty good. The blue bar represents all of the mentors who answered, and a 4 would be strongly agree or highly effective, and a 0 or 1 would be not at all, not effective, disagree. Overall, you can see mentors are feeling like the program is supporting them and meeting their needs. And the yellow bar is our average. The blue bar is one program, and the yellow bar is our average across our network. We drill down into each of these. So these are roll-up summary questions of multiple items. Is my residency program offers residents a good balance of theoretical and practical strategies to strengthen their effectiveness in the classroom? So the mentor is saying, yeah, this is pretty good. And then you can compare what is the mentor perceptions with the resident perception. So I think one of the reasons we ended up developing this was because as we ask more and more of teacher prep programs and these partnerships to come together, we have to acknowledge that these may not always have been really data-driven relationships, but we wanted our programs to really appreciate the data they had control over that they could look at, and then we wanted to help give them some tools to analyze it. And I think that's where the majority of our partners are right now. They understand the need for impact and implementation data. And a lot of where the support that they need is actually looking at the analysis to tell their story for both implementation and impact. And I think just the one thing I would point out here is that second blue bar, the 3.0, the coursework provided to residents is relevant to my school context and classroom. We would raise this as a flag for this program, because what this is identifying is that there's a gap between the coursework a resident might experience and then going and applying that in the classroom. So there needs to be some communication happening here between the teacher educators and the faculty that may be delivering coursework.